friends, this is Rick, and welcome to your seat at the table. And about to join us is Frankie, the shelter cat. He just keeps climbing on the table. Come on, Frankie. Let's get down, Daddy. You can do this thing. So what we're talking about is where did all the warships go? And this is something that's not quite unique to BattleTech, the universe, but a lot of science fiction franchises, as you're familiar with, have spaceships, starships, jump ships, warp-capable vessels all play critical roles in how the game and how the universe or the world building operates. And in some places, in some franchises, the ships are everything. Star Trek would not be anything without starships. Star Wars, it's the same thing. So we have an entire galaxy for starships are like automobiles for us today. In BattleTech, it's not quite that extensive. The jump ship fleets are grossly diminished compared to what they were at the height of the Star League, at the beginning of the Succession Wars. This has crippled the economy and growth and exploration efforts for centuries. The warship fleets in the Age of War and the Reunification War, the area of the Star League, and up until the first Succession War, were quite extensive, quite large for the setting. But in reality, the warships are actually not very well designed. They're not very capable and powerful as they would be if you compare them to other franchises, which we don't. The other thing is they're not prolific. We don't literally have tens of thousands of warships, of jump ships in BattleTech at any point in its existence. The fact that they numbered in the hundreds is remarkable. And at the height of their era and their punch, there may be a 3,000 or 4,000 warships at any one time combined between all the fleets that had them, if that many. And attrition in BattleTech is brutal. These ships are not, they're quite robust, but they're still fragile. They still work and grounded in principles that we understand and physics that we understand to our modern era today. That means they don't have starship shields. They're not kilometers long with tens of thousands of crew. They don't have the resources and the capability of traveling extreme ranges of speed and distance. One of the things, those critical stumbling blocks in the technology era of BattleTech has always been the jump capacity, ability to move. So at most, majority jump ships are limited to a jump of no more than 30 light years. From point A to point B, no more than 30. So they could jump a half a light year or 29.5 light years, but they can't jump 75 light years. And at the end of the tail end of the Star League, and then through some of the Clan era, and hit or miss from there on out, some jump ships are equipped with a second lithium battery system, so they basically have a jump charge that they can then take a second jump almost immediately upon arriving. So they potentially have doubled their range to 60 light years. The idea, though, is that these things take time to recharge. They use solar energy. So at the end of the day, their capacity for movement is endless. These ships are only limited to time and consumables required by their crews and for maintenance. As for fuel, things like this, when it comes to jump travel, is faster than light travel. I've never heard, it's never been speculated or suggested or hinted at in any of the lore or stories I've read. And I grant you, there's a lot of stuff I have, especially in the last 15 years, that I have not read. So may have not kept up on this, but I have never heard of any warships or jump ships being created that had ranges greater than 30 light years per jump. And I've never heard of any of them having more than one spare battery. So potentially two jumps, as opposed to, say, somehow building a jump ship that has 5 lithium batteries, allowing them the potential to travel 150 light years, making 5 jumps one after another. It's implied that multiple jumps in such a short period of time is physically taxing, mentally taxing on the people that are in the ships, and I don't know what kind of effect on the machinery itself would have. So I know that the most sophisticated ships that thus have multiple, or have at least the capability of a second lithium battery system to make 2 jumps, and of course it takes twice as long to recharge that ship because you're recharging 2 sets of batteries, and you can't, and you either charge one completely then the second one, or you split your energy and it takes twice as long to recharge both. Now the fact that we have jump stations, and they were prolific at one time at the height of the Star League and First Succession War, many settled systems, most of the key settled systems, key transit systems, had stations at the nadir and zenith jump points with the ability to recharge numerous jump ships. So your jump ship could jump in and then dock with the station and plug in, and their capacitor system, whether it was solar generator or fusion power generated, would allow you to charge the batteries on your ship and potentially charge both of them at the same time without needing to deploy your own solar shield or solar sail to do so. A lot of those were destroyed. Some still function, some still exist, but quite a few of them were destroyed in the succession wars and are not replaced. Another thing that we don't take for, or we may or may not take for granted, is that constructing warships of that scale, even constructing a basic jump ship, can take upwards of a year or longer to assemble it, to build it, to make sure it functions right. A warship can take several years. Consider the sheer amount of materials that go into creating a warship. A jump ship alone is probably the equivalent of a regiment's worth of electronics and material, if not more. So to build a single jump ship, you could field an entire regiment or 2 of battle mechs on the ground, in equivalent in resources and material and money and so on and so forth. A warship is going to be a magnitude higher, so potentially 5 to 10 times the amount of material or more that a standard jump ship requires to be constructed goes into the warship, because of all the armor and weapons and auxiliary systems that those require, and the larger crew and the crew support and the stuff that they require to function. So it could take anywhere from 2 to 4 years, depending on the sheer size of the warship we're talking about being constructed. And there's nowhere in the lore, even at the height of the Star League, that implies that there were hundreds and hundreds of shipyards. There are quite a few, but according to our current lore now, the numbers are really not as great as I originally thought they might be. And so that means that the handful of shipyards that did exist were quite extensive, and we're producing a dozen, 2 dozen warships in a given time, and they're probably, I don't know, releasing one 3 or 4 a month, or 4 or 5 a month for trials, and starting the construction of, laying the keels down for the next one. And of course, the sizes of the ships matter too. This is why there will be far fewer battleships and battle cruisers than there are corvettes and destroyers. The smaller ship means you're going to be able to produce more of them, perhaps faster than you're going to produce the big behemoths, and your pound for pound, credit for credit, your better deal is to have more smaller ships than larger ships. And though we don't have an exact breakdown of the various fleets of the houses or the SLDF exactly, we kind of got an idea on a mix that you're going to see far more lighter mechs or warships than the battleship and battle cruiser class, for good reason. So we're not looking at a massive amount of warships to start with. And when the Star League, the SLDF, decides to leave and Paul's Krinsky out, the lore stipulates around 500 plus warships accompany the SLDF fleet, and several, upwards of 1,000 plus jump ships. So we know that represents a significant number. It also gives us a ballpark number to work with. So if by the end of the Amaris crisis, the Amaris Civil War, if the Star League fleet has available to it about six to 700 warships of various classes, and possibly 1,500 to 2,000 jump ships of various classes. Because we know that a small percentage of them remained behind. Some of them ended up in the hands of Comstar, and some of them were deemed unspaceworthy for the trip that they were going to be this vast long journey that was being planned out, so they were purposely left behind, and some cases scrapped, partially scrapped, stripped of viable parts that they could use to keep the other fleet ships operating. And then there was a number of Star League Defense Force units that remained behind, quite a few divisions. Some turned mercenary, some joined. Well, the majority of them went to work for Comstar and became their hidden resource. This included warships and jump ships. Although I have not seen in any record that any of the quote mercenary commands that came out of the SLDF at the end of the Amaris Civil War and the beginning of the end of the Star League possessed warships. I suspect they probably would not have retained them for long. If they did, the houses would have either taken them outright or had purchased them. More likely, the warships that remained behind were definitely in the hands of Comstar, who was very careful about shielding how many they had and what the capacity they had available. So we know that roughly see, what was it? Close to 600-700 warships are left behind at the beginning of the First Succession War, and on the average house. So the houses are quite naval heavy. They have quite a bit of resources and quite a bit of jump ships and fleets. And another thing that they don't talk about lore, it's a given, is that jump ship capacity, the jump ship travel was much older than this period of time. So jump fleet ability has been around for several hundred years during the Age of War and prior to the forming of the Star League and the early exploration, the first exodus from Earth and the second exodus from Earth kind of scenario. And it's implied in the TROs that there are other jump ships and drop ship designs and potentially warship designs that were not covered in the TROs that we have, so that there were a good 30 or 40% still available to be yet introduced or could be player introduced. And some of that might also include is some of the various earliest designs, the ships that they didn't have, and or that was the initial forays into exploration and movement of humanity away from Terra. And over time, through attrition, design changes, things like this, they were retired, mothballed, destroyed, disassembled, and replaced with newer, bigger, more capable equipment given that time. The things that we look at from the First Succession War is just the sheer brutality of the engagement that takes place. And I'm going to go through a number of different. Let's get the right button here, folks. All right, I got the right button. Is the right one? All right. So I'm going to go through a number of entries in the First Succession War, because this is the lore book that I currently have that brings us more up to date, brings my understanding of things up to date. And so looking at some examples, I'm not going to read through everything, but here is Cholame, Cholame, however you want to pronounce it. And in the aftermath of his first failed counterattack, Prince John immediately turns his attention towards mustering a second. Recognized from the battle reports that Creed and naval strength has played the key role in his defeats, decided to direct his second counteroffensive towards eliminating that advantage. So an assembled force with a total of more than 100 warships, assault vessels, paired with roughly equal number of fighter wings, with a task turning the Dragon's Book back in on itself. So, skipping forward a little bit on this. come to the conclusion. The Battle of Chelam would be the largest naval action the Draconis Com and the Federated Sons ever fought against each other. Raging for 6 weeks, the running fight stretched across the Chelam system as Admirals Jones and Stone desperately tried to buy time for their surviving transports to recharge and jump to safety, with Taisha Khalafi's armada in hot pursuit. By the time the battle ended on 17 April, the Sons had lost 92 warships, including the Golden Lion herself, along with 26 transport jump ships, 115 drop ships, and virtually all of its fighter wings, which initially was close to 100 fighter wings. The Draconis Combine's losses at Chelam were nearly as catastrophic. 83 warships, 19 jump ship transports, and 105 dropships are destroyed. Khalfani's fleet also lost more than 80% of its aerospace fighters in battle. The sheer number of casualties and Chelam was a horrific victory for House Kurita. The Sons had lost the bulk of its navy in one battle, but in doing so, they had essentially hobbled the Combine's invasion. It would take more than 14 months, in fact, for the Dragon to relocate enough of its commercial jump ships to make up for its loss of transports along the front line. Additionally, most of the Combine's attack forces would now make planetfall without the benefit of naval support, with only a bare minimum air cover once the battle was joined. So we're looking at, in this one engagement over 6 weeks, between the Federated Sons and the Draconis Combine, they're losing, it's 92 and 83. So we're looking at 170 odd warships are destroyed in a matter of 6 weeks. Not damaged, but rendered unserviceable or unrepairable. Hence the part destroyed. And we're looking at nearly 180 air regiments of aerospace fighters that are destroyed, and several hundred drop ships, and close to 50 jump ships, transports. So right in this one battle alone is a massive cut. And what did and if you look at what I just mentioned about the fact that every house has shipyards, but they don't have 20 or 30 of them. They have a dozen at most, a handful at best. These shipyards have the capacity of maybe churning out, 5 or 6 warships a year or a month, assuming that they're vast and they're large, and that you can continue putting the resources and the material and the components into that manufacturing process. Because we're looking at when you look at the sheer expense and support services required to build warships, let alone operate them and maintain them, it implies that a big chunk of the house, given house's yearly gross national product, GNP, is going to go into this maintaining and constructing their fleets. And this was done over dozens of years, if not centuries, to get up to the level of the pre-First Succession War. And to see such devastating losses, a significant percentage of these warship fleets destroyed like this in a matter of weeks, means that if you lose 90 warships in 6 weeks, and you can only produce, let's say, 5 new warships every month, how long is it going to take to recoup that? Meanwhile, you have a war going, multiple wars. So the truth is, you're never going to in any time the next decade or two, you are never going to recover from that, just this single battle. These two houses have crippled their navies, and for all intents purposes. It just goes on and on how we look at this. So, and it's not just the Federated Sons in the Confederation, the Draconis Combine. This is happening all across the houses. So here we are, it's Scandi in February 2787. A mere 2 months after the coordinator's declaration of war, a massive combine force materialized at the NATO jump station in Scandia's system. This attack group included 45 warships protecting a transport fleet of 20 jump ships and enough dropships to ferry 6 fully supported DCM mech regiments. Landing the assault was Taisho Harishi Pedersen and his flagship, the Smakarad-class carrier DCMS Galadan. Having humiliated the LCAF forces on planet in the first step, what meant to look like a Terran tribe, or just 8 months before, blah, blah, blah. What they found instead was a Commonwealth naval presence, nearly 300 combat ships strong, with a warship complement of 50 vessels, including Tharkad-class battle cruisers, Impregnable and Indomitable. 200 dropships of various classes, backed up by these formidable battle wagons, led by Admiral Seamus Van Houten, a competent, untested fleet commander. Said because a significant number of the Steiner ships were clustered close to Skandia itself rather than the system's recharge points, Pedersen presumed that the fleet was mustered specifically to blunt his advance. Worried that the Commonwealth's military somehow knew of the House Creed's entire border strategy, sent a courier back to Combine Space to report the possibility of a security breach. All right. So the conclusion at the fight for Skandia continues for nearly 4 months. But the bulk of the naval action was over in the first 4 weeks. Of the Lyran's initial fleet, almost 300 dropships and warships, and only a third of almost 300 dropships and warships, only a third remained operational by the battle's end. While the Combine still had half its initial strength. So they entered the system with some, what does it say here? 45 warships. So now they're down to 22, 23 warships, and a fleet of 20 jump ships and enough drop ships. So close to 100 drop ships. Now they've lost half of this. One of the casualties was Van Houten's flagship, the Impregnable, which was crippled in close combat. The Lyran fleet was almost as decimated. So here, once again, and yet another battle, the Draconis Combine loses another 20-odd warships within a few weeks, and the Commonwealth loses more than half of their warships in orbit, and in addition to that, all the loss of the combat dropships and transport dropships that were engaged in the battle. So we have quite an attrition going on here in these battles. And it just continues on and on. Right? So we talk about, let's see, here's an example. The Devils credit high velocity gamut largely sleeved at terrible cost. By the time the space battle was over, and this would be at what is this? The debacle at Callaway. Time the space battle was over and the Chancellor's ship was safely away. His task force was finished. Of the 30 warships, 50 attack dropships, and 56 transport dropships that came to Callaway, only 12 warships, 6 attack ships, and 5 mech transports, and 3 fighter carriers managed to disengage long enough to regroup and jump out of the solar system. Also lost were virtually all of Devlin's aerospace fighters. Of the 7 mech regiments that joined the operation, only the Red Lancers, 3rd Confederation Reserve Cavalry, and the 5th Leo Lancers managed to survive with any significant streak. Among the most significant compelling casualties of the entire debacle was both the Chancellor's sons. In addition to Barnabas Nemise on Callaway 6, and Belazar Leal was killed in a space battle when the Kesselrine, an Essex-class destroyer he'd been transferred to, was destroyed by an Aegis-class cruiser Pleiades. Colonel Devlin himself was also killed when the Sunderman Leal was struck by multiple fire-launched nuclear warheads. For House Merrick, the battle at Callaway cost 12 warships, 24 assault dropships, and roughly 2 regiments worth of fighters. All the remaining capital ships suffered significant damage. The League would make up for some of these losses by salvaging most of the wrecks of the Capellans left behind. So we're back, and here is on the Merrick and Capellan front. Same thing's going on. Large battles in the initial months and years of the First Succession War sees these vast fleet battles that just wreck each other's fleets. This has its toll. It takes its toll because over time this is reducing the amount of warships that they can field. And what they do have, a lot of them are suffered significant damage. They have to be repaired if that's possible, and that takes time. And that also requires time in. Also takes time inside of dealing with your shipyard capacity. So if your shipyards also have to be tasked to do repairs and maintenance. Well, not just maintenance, but repairs, extensive repairs to some of your fleet ships. You can't build new ships because you've only got so many space dock fleets, shipyards capacity, so many slips to use, etc., etc. So we talk about yet another section called the Vacuum War. On 17 February 2787, Free World League warships assaulted Lyran Commonwealth's Bolson shipyards in the New Kyoto system. Major producer of jump ships and freighters, the factories orbiting New Kyoto's largest moon, Wingcha, were also involved in manufacture of various warship support systems and periodic refits. This makes them a prime target for intense industrial raiding that characterized much of the First Succession War. Recognizing the strategic danger, the Commonwealth has dispatched a large group of corvettes and assault dropships to defend these facilities when the war broke out. Backing them up was reinforced regiment of heavy aerospace fighters. When the League inevitably attacks, they did so with a task force that included 3 mixed destroyer squadrons, 2 reinforced wings of aerospace fighters, sent around the Cameron-class battlecruiser FLS Rosales. The battle for the Bolshin shipyards with a high-speed engagement lasted less than 15 minutes from first shots fired to last. In that sliver of time, the Lyrans lost close to a dozen warships, the majority of the 53rd Aerospace Interceptors Regiment. The League Task Force lost most of its fighters, 7 destroyers, and the Rosales. Crippled by a fighter pilot's suicide run, the great ship veered out of control directly into the heart of the Bolson yards. The destruction of the Bolson shipyards was a severe blow to the Lyran shipbuilding. That dramatic battle over New Kyoto has been memorized and dramatized many times throughout history. But within the context of the First War, it was merely a sample of an overreaching strategy in which all 5 of the great houses engaged. Having spent 5 years leading up to the war in a frenzied arms race, it was well known that all the successor states that the combat navies represented one of the largest and most expensive branches of their military industries. Transport navies, including both military and civilian non-combat jump ships, were also a vital element, the backbone of the very infrastructure that enabled them to administer trade, move troops, ensure logistical, economic, and social integrity of their respective realms. This made FTL shipbuilding and all active warship navies a priority target for the entirety of the First Succession War. Making matters more difficult for all participants, it was the need to produce FTL vessels via spaceborne shipyards, a consequence of the physical engineering needs of virtually every hyperspace-capable craft since the dawn of interstellar travel, made those very yards difficult to protect. Worse still, after many state-of-the-art yards were lost or crippled during the Amaris currency conflict, what shipbuilders remained tended to be close to the Terran hegemony, located to take advantage of the naval trades long dominated by House Cameron. When the Star League collapsed, a large number of these intersphere jump ship and warship yards were in striking distance of their enemies, and the House Lords knew it. So in the course of the First Succession War, the destruction of the naval assets and shipbuilding was so heavily emphasized that the combined navies of the Intersphere dropped from just over 900 active warships at the war's beginning to less than 30 at the time of the Bella Accords. More importantly, virtually every single factory, refit yard, and naval support facility capable of manufacturing and maintaining the expensive compact KF drive cores used in warship construction was destroyed or crippled by hostile action or sabotage. By the end of the First War, in fact, the only shipyards still operating in your sphere were those that could build and service jump drives for civilian and transport sectors. Of these survivors, many were damaged by deep raids or limited by the loss of secondary manufacturing and support industries. Keep that in mind because that's an important point. Meanwhile, the loss of warships and the rampant destruction of any enemy jump ships capable of delivering troops to a planet left the houses increasingly short on transports for trade and other logistical needs. For House Davion's Federated Sons, which lost many transports and warships in the opening years of the combat invasion, the losses were so bad that the government was forced to seize civilian and merchant traffic from across the realm. As the Davions increasingly diverted resources to manufacture and repair transports over more expensive, powerful warships, the resulting disruption in trade and loss of capital-grade support manufacturing quickly undermined the local economies across the suns. House Steiner's Lyran Commonwealth, which began the war with the largest warship mercantile fleet in the inner sphere, found itself so strapped for interstellar transport that whole worlds began succumbing to starvation and environmental collapse after local transport companies found themselves similarly pressed into military service. Toward the end of the war, the Lyran Archon was even forced to suspend the Estates General after these jump ship conscriptions made it impossible for the various planetary representatives to gather effectively. The other three successor states fared no better. For all their pre-war buildups, the mighty warship fleets of every state evaporated amidst the fires of the First Succession War. As whole fleets succumbed to massed fleet actions of the opening years, such as Shalom, Scandia, and the battle for Hesperus II, ships began appearing in smaller and smaller formation, with fewer capital ships working in concert, and fighter-launched nuclear ordnance an accepted tactic for both anti-ship and anti-industry raids. Warships and jump ships became even easier prey as the war wore on. Before long, House Creta Leal Merritt quickly joined Daviana Steiner in cannibalizing their own merchant marines just to move their troops around. Meanwhile, a preview of the fate of even the vaunted battle mech by the 3020s, destruction of naval yards forced the various navies to cannibalize the more damaged warships to keep their increasingly smaller fleets operational. A trend that would only accelerate as the First War bled into the Second. And so was the age of the warship slid inexorably toward the end. Right? So it's not rocket science. It's not hard to understand just how bad this became and how much of a problem it turned into for everybody involved. Because at some point you end up with no ship capacity or almost no ship capacity to deal with. So if we look at that perspective, we're looking at shipbuilding casualties of the First Succession War. The compelling Confederation saw its Delhi warship yard at Capella destroyed. The Delhi warships at Carver 4 destroyed. Crester's ship construction on Kied destroyed. Crester's ship construction on Terra Firma destroyed. Raspar Owens Incorporated, Capella, damaged. Thomas Shipyards, Kied, destroyed. The Draconis Kame sees the Uzumi yard, jump ship yards at Altar destroyed, Crester ship construction, Yori destroyed, LTV Aerospace, Inselmod destroyed, Stellar Trek at Chatham survived, Stellar Trek at Darien destroyed. Federated Sons loses. The Federated Boeing at Galex is crippled. The Kenneth Shipyards at Cathel crippled. Universal Air at Davalon is damaged. Free Worlds League sees Boeing Industries at Wasset destroyed. DeKirk Aerospace at Graham 4 destroyed. D-Tron Heavy Industries at Cyrus destroyed. Iran Naval Systems at Clipperton and Regulon crippled. Mitchell Vehicles Interstellar on Graham 4 ground facilities are destroyed. The Celisys Incorporated Loyalty Graham Merrick is destroyed. The Technicron Manufacturing at Tamaran is destroyed. Laird Camberwell sees the Boeing Interstellar at New Earth destroyed. Bolson Shipyards at New Kyoto destroyed. Bolson Tamer Shipyards on Tamer destroyed. The Dassault Shemin Enterprises New Earth destroyed. Dytron Heavy Industries New Earth destroyed. Dytron Heavy Industries on Zebabaka Nubigibi, or however it's pronounced, is destroyed. Kester Ships Construction on Thorn destroyed. Comstar Blue Nose Clipper ships on Mars decommissioned. Boeing Interstellar Terra decommissioned. Dytron Heavy Industries Terra decommissioned. Crester Ship Construction on Terra decommissioned. And the periphery, the Athena Corporation at Canopus destroyed. Concordat Aerospace Limited in the Taurus system is destroyed. Row Weapon Systems at Finmark and the Rim Worlds is destroyed. United Outworlders Corporation, Remora Outworlds is decommissioned. So when we look at this and we think, gee, okay, if most of the major houses lose their primary shipyards, especially the shipyards that are capable of producing and maintaining warships. So why does a few of them that get damaged or not repaired or decommissioned? Or in the case of Comstar, why did it decommission all their facilities? This implies those decommissioned facilities could be recommissioned at some point to resume manufacturing capabilities for building warships. that Comstar was in a position potentially to have built a warship fleet that would dominate and rival, imperially, just completely dominate all the other houses combined. So why didn't they? What was their reasons for not doing it? Excuse me. I can only speculate. I believe their reasons for this would be that once the great houses are denuded of their warship fleets, and by the end of the Second Succession War, they're pretty much finished. There are no warships left by the end of the Succession War that are worth mentioning. No more naval engagements. There's no need for Comstar to operate and maintain these massively expensive vessels and the resources and the support services required to support them. B, there's no competition for them. No, really, why would you need these things if none of your potential foes or future foes have them either? 3, envy, greed, and concern. If you happen to be the only force left in the inner sphere fielding these things, it won't be very long before one or more of those successor states are coming for you. They're either going to come for you because out of fear, out of prudence, or out of greed. Make your choice, right? Then there's the fourth part. The fourth part that, it doesn't quite get as much, I think. We talk about it a lot, but it doesn't get, I don't think it really sinks in just how. And this how this applies clear across the board when we talk about the inner sphere in general. We're talking about manufacturing. So much of the advanced manufacturing facilities and orbital manufacturing facilities, but also ground-based facilities, are decimated or outright scagged by nuclear, chemical, or biological warfare conducted by the great houses against each other in an effort to reduce or deny these resources to their foes, and to the detriment to everybody, including themselves. This is like attacking the jump ship fleets of your opponents is cutting your own nose off at the end of the day. You're cutting your toes off and your fingers off one by one because you're limiting the actual overall capacity for economic growth, development, and transport within the inner sphere, period. And this misguided idea that if we'll still have ours if you don't have yours turns out to be a bad thing. At the end of the day, they weren't thinking. They were only thinking about their immediate needs and desires and what they wanted now, and not the long-term effects of a lot of what's going to happen. And it's not until later when they start waking up and they start, oh, maybe we shouldn't do this. Oh, we're almost to the point where we've hosed ourselves, and to where we're going to be all landlocked once again, and we'll no longer be a starfaring race. We'll have a humanity spread across 1,000 worlds, but they won't be able to communicate or transport between themselves because you're going to blow up what's left of the capability to manufacture and to repair and to maintain the material components needed. This makes a role. So, with the complex economic system and industrial system that's established during the Starlink era, so much production of very specific things are isolated. So, it may be only 2 worlds in the entire house that has the capability of producing the jump cores for jump ships. And those jump cores require probably 2 dozen different kinds of factories to produce different components that go into these things. And some of these are going to be very specific to the jump ship core. So if you lose the 3 factories that produce the doohickey that allows the whatchamacallit in the jump drive to function, then all the other material components required and available to you to produce that jump site or a jump core are worthless, because you're lacking one piece, one part, one thing that you can't manufacture locally because you either don't know how, you don't have the proprietary information needed to do so, or you don't have the specific elements that were required to produce that item, which is why it was being produced on the place it was at the place it was. And or possibly because in the process of destroying the factories and the shipyards and the maintenance repair facilities and potentially the cities and atmosphere that they're in, by just nuking the whole damn thing or chemically bombing the whole damn thing. You're eliminating all those trained, technical, experienced individuals who do the manufacturing, who know how to make them, the engineers who know how to develop them, the researchers, all these people who have to be concentrated in that same city you just nuked. Durr. Hello, Durr. So it all combines, it all comes up in this role. This is the same problem we see as things progress and the technology starts to backslide across the board, even for the military, for the mechs, for the tanks, for the infantry, general infantry, etc. All this is the same things work together. So later, after the Klan invasion, during the height of the Klan, in that first year law, when the before the Battle of Tukiad, when the Ragahasa fighter pilot drives her ship into the flagship of the Klan's leader at that time, and kills the Smoke Dragon clan, and makes the clans all head back to or all their blood name warriors all have to head back to the home clans to elect a new icon for their invasion. The Starship, the inner houses start this crash course in warship building and design. If you notice, the handful of warship designs that came out, most of them were built on existing blueprints that they may have that they were lucky enough to have squirreled away. A lot of the components that these things required, they either had stashed away in warehouses, been sitting around for centuries, being unused because they had no reason or drive or desire to access them, or they finally was able to reverse engineer enough stuff from captured clan equipment and from things like the Hell Memory Core in order to restart some of these factories. Some of these factories, well, just may have been damaged, were not completely destroyed, and had been set out the rest of the succession wars mostly as abandoned facilities, but yet still functionable apparently. Or they were built brand new outright. So a huge amount of resources and credits from the economies of these very houses are poured into this warship building program. And what is the result? A handful of warships. Now, grant you, because the clans did not come full bore into the inner sphere, they only brought a handful of warships, mostly for supportive roles and for prestige, not because they expected to have any naval combat or naval battles of any significance. The fact is that we know that the Star League Defense Force left with an excess of 500, damn 600 warships, and however many of those remained and survived after all the stuff that they put themselves through, and time has never been quite put into print. I suspect several hundred warships remain, and quite a few of them are still in catches, space versions of brain catches, orbiting some distant star or some distant gas giant somewhere where they were mothballed, and just in case. So each of the main clans has a limited number of warships available, in the single-digit numbers, maybe in a double-digit numbers at most, which puts them worlds and leagues and leagues above anything the inner sphere can feel. When the inner sphere can feel no warship, then just having 5 warships puts you at a gross disadvantage. One more reason why the clan should have just run ramshot over the houses, but they didn't. Because there was no world, at no point, in no way, at the end of the day, was the clans ever going to just run in and run right over the top of all the houses. It was inevitable the houses would turn around, wake up, and grind the clans down, because that's what the houses have been doing to each other since the first succession war. Nothing's changed. They also had the sheer vast numbers and resources available to them. They also had an ace in the hole, Comstar. Comstar had a number of warships from the SLDF fleet mothballed. They did not produce any significant new ones other than the occasional jump ship out of any of their yards. So they have all these yards intact. They're just mothballed. So they also have a pretty heavy industrial base on Terra and a handful of other, quote, hidden worlds. They also have the knowledge. More importantly, they have the knowledge. They have trained people who can do most of the basics and are capable of learning the stuff that they didn't need to know until now. So when we look at something that, once again, and I've seen this in other videos and other YouTube provider websites and stuff, fan sites and stuff for BattleTech, that they tend to either glance off of this or never bring it up at all. Well, the warships of the Inner Sphere were building warships and took on the clans. Truth is, there was very few. The only real warship inner sphere combat versus clan combat takes place in clan space when the second Star League takes forces to go after the clan Smoke Jaguar's homeworld and crush it. So there's a few engagements there, but there's no any significant naval battles that take place in this period of time. The houses do produce a number of warships, and they do initiate warship programs. But I have no reason to believe, and I have yet to see anything in lore that suggested they came anywhere near the numbers that they had at the end of the Star League. They didn't they didn't build hundreds of warships for their home fleets. They just didn't. You know, they just the numbers were marginal. And then when everything just through the Dark Ages, through the Jihad, to the modern current rendition, the Ilkhan, I still don't see any kind of inclination that there are any large, massive naval combat battles going on. Yeah, there are naval warships, and every house is fielding them, and modest numbers, but not in staggering numbers, not in the hundreds. And the fact that their capacity and capability of building these ships are still a very critical Achilles heel in any naval strategy, because it wouldn't take much to go out and wreck that shipyard. And you do it in such a way that it takes decades or years, if not a decade, to get fully functional back up to capacity. You just, once again, put a big, huge stake through the heart of a naval strategy of a given house. The other key component, I'll go back to Comstar, is that the earliest warships, one of the reasons that they couldn't produce warships after the Second Succession War, you see no warship development or construction at all in the Third Succession War or in the years leading up to the clan invasion. And it's because the houses lack the critical component of that jump core. And it's not just any jump core, because they do manufacture a handful of jump cores to keep the jump ship fleets operating. They're going to need some replacement cores because old cores wear out or get damaged. And they also going to, for those odd dozen or baker's dozen of jump ships across the inner sphere periphery that are manufactured every year prior to the clan invasion, you still need those cores. Without those jump cores. Now there is one bit of lore in that I believe the Federated Sons or House Steiner had a supply of jump cores. They had a stockpile that they were still a Star League era stockpile warehouse that somehow survived, and they were doling these things out. But more important, it's Comstar. Comstar still has the facilities to produce the cores. And the warships, unlike jump ships, require compact cores. The cores are significantly different from those used in the merchant jump ships. They're not as long, they're not as bulky or something, but more importantly, they're sufficiently different that that you can't interchange them. So you're not going to use the traditional jump ship core to build a warship around. It's just not going to be able to function. It's not going to be able to produce the power outlet that's needed. Perhaps it's the sheer size of the damn thing, it's the sheer length of the damn thing makes the warship less robust. Every story, every visual entity we have of these, jump ships are pretty fragile. I mean, when we look at these things, we're looking at, let's see if I can find this or not. Yeah, I guess I didn't put that one in there. Maybe I did. Here, there we go. These things are pretty fragile. They're not warships. They're not heavily armored. They're not heavily armed. It doesn't take much to knock one of these things out and render them incapacitated or incapable of functioning. So Comstar has this ability to still produce these micro jump cores, which allow the big warships to be manufactured in small numbers, and they purposely dole it out to the various houses very strictly. And this was even before this was when Primus Miterly or whatever her name was still in charge, and they wanted to keep a very strict control of how many warships these houses were going to be allowed to build, as much as they could. So, excuse the cough. We got ourselves this brutal. The first couple of years of the First Succession War basically devastates the ship, the interstellar warship fleets of the Great Houses. The rest of the First Succession War sees a consistent grind of these forces and reducing them more and more until the point where there's just a tenth of the warships at the beginning of the Second War, which is where we see the majority of them destroyed. Same thing happens to the warship or the jump ship fleet. So we also look at this thing called Farewell to Arms, and I found it interesting and worth blathering about. The weapons of the First Succession were those of the Star League: extended range PPCs, pulse lasers, streak missiles, and the like. Mechs, tanks, fighters used advanced armor composites, structural components, making them lighter, faster than their cousins of the Age of War or the later Succession Wars. However, producing such advanced components required sophisticated industrial capabilities, and the targeting of infrastructure in the First Succession War that soon became a problem. The collapse of the Inner Sphere's technology base began slowly, even before many production facilities were reduced to smoking ruins. Collapse in trade caused shortages of key materials necessary to production of war material even before the outbreaks of the General War, but reserves built up during the Amaris crisis allowed the great houses to continue large-scale production right up to the eve of the First Succession War. The main exception was the supermassive consumers such as warship producers. The shortages of rare materials such as gallium arsenide halted the production of these behemoths even before Kerensky's departure. As a consequence, while ground forces grew significantly, there was little expansion of naval forces. This also meant that the massive naval losses of the First Succession War could not be made good or fielded with downgraded technologies. For the ground forces, the first sign of technological plight was the increasing scarcity of advanced munitions. War stockpiles were consumed within the first few years of the conflict, and munition factories struggled to keep up with the demand even before they themselves became targets of the war. Units often had to make do with locally produced dumb munitions in lieu of their smart rounds, which were often funneled to premier units. But by the mid-2790s, even these elite formations were deprived of advanced rounds, munition factories, which made them either reduced to cinders or lacking key components or materials. Similarity. Similarly, replacement armor and weapons became increasingly scarce. Field repairs often required the replacement of an advanced system with a less sophisticated but more readily available system. Frankenmets became the order of the day, often employing jury-rig systems and field downgrades to remain operational. New vehicle production suffered similar issues. The production lines might be able to physically assemble Star League-era spec warhammers, but lacked the air PPCs, the armor composites, and the electronics to do so. Instead, there was a gradual downgrading of specifications. Standard autocannons replaced ultra versions, ER lasers dropped in favor of regular versions, and so forth. Few low-tech designs appear instantly. Instead, the designs like the MAD 3R Marauder emerged slowly from the Star League-era Lost Tech versions. Despite this, the designs and configurations of the Star League remained the principal versions of mechs, tanks, and fighters in use through the end of the First Succession War into the early 29th century. It would take the brutality of the Second Succession War and the long slog of the Third to further degrade the battle technology to its nadir before slow climbing back up, the beginning early with the 31st century. While the advanced equipment became increasingly scarce in the first 2 decades of the First Succession War, saw significant production that still allowed the raising of new units. These formations, such as the 16th Lineman Guards, were generally less well equipped than their pre-war siblings. It wasn't until near the end of the First Succession War, and more notably during the Second Succession War, that production fell so low that the great houses struggled to even maintain existing equipment formations. keep that in mind. That plays an important role, because you have this problem with manufacturing capability and consumption and random wanton destruction without any consideration of how we're going to replace and maintain what we have, how are we going to keep building new things. This also sees an evolution. There's I'm thinking about doing another video on why are there so many mediocre mechs in BattleTech. Seriously, if you listen to everybody, you go in and you listen to all these fine YouTube channels that make some great content. I am not poo-pooing on them whatsoever, but a lot of them do these nice renditions on highlighting this mech design and that mech design and their capabilities, their faults, what makes them great, what makes them mediocre, what makes them, what makes them what they are. What they don't want to often seem to either glaze over or outright ignore is just why. Why are there so many crappy designs available? Why are there no second tier warships? Why are the combat assault drop ships that are in the inner sphere as of 3025 so lackadaisical, so mediocre in their own design? Well, my opinion is A, you obliterate your industrial capacity for manufacturing the higher tech items you have. That's going to cause you a problem. B, when you obliterate the technical staff and the engineers and the physicists and people who allow you to create that stuff in the first place, you just pretty much kneecap your R&D department. So the odds of them improving on these things are not going to be there. They're more about surviving and somehow adapting lesser technologies or older versions of stuff to function with existing things. 3, when you obliterate your manufacturing base, your manufacturing capacity, you've now just limited yourself to what you can produce. And the fact is that most of these houses were all members of the SLD, the Star League, and the SLDF all had standards. And so a lot of these houses were used to producing that standard and those generic designs or those specialty lines for the various Star League formations, and then tap those for themselves as well and for third parties. Then there's this greed factor. Number 5, and this works in the modern day too. So many of these outfits it's all about money. So we can produce something that it's not great, it's not bad, it'll do. And they make enough of them to make enough money off of them because people still buy them. So when we have all these combinations working together, they call it a slow slide for a reason. The third succession war it's just this long, painful, slow loss of technology that's just going to eventually cripple the entire inner sphere and outer sphere. Eventually, if things were to continue just to keep plodding along the way they were, the odds were really good in another century or more. The space travel will pretty much be over. And combat, battlemech era battlemechs will probably almost diminish to the point of being very rare, because there just isn't going to be enough resources and knowledge to maintain and keep them at standards. There's this aftermarket, after the clans show up, after the Helm Memory Core, after the creation of the NASA's and other house think tanks and research facilities, we see this uptick and this upsurge in development and research and this, quote, rediscovery of old technologies. And yet, we don't see a whole lot of new innovation. We don't see a whole lot of effort put into something that's better. The clans do this a little bit. This is why the clans weapons. Let's use the ER laser for an example. Because on Big Red's channel, he did some talking. There was on one of his chats. They were talking about the benefits or what makes the ER large laser made by the inner sphere such a crappy design. But let's take into account this is not the original ER design. This is not the design that was at the height of the Star League. So at the heart of the Star League, the ER laser is pretty potent. It's pretty capable. It's pretty good bang for your buck. Its heat ratio is not that bad. Its weight ratio is not that bad. the clans take their versions with them, and they improve on it. So they then come back with the clan version of the ER laser, and it's lighter, it's does as much or more damage, and does less heat because it's superior. This is in part because they did put a lot of money into research and development specifically for weapon systems and support things of that nature, because that's their thing. That's their cup of tea. So their version is going to be what the Starlink's original laser would have been had the Starlink not failed, or if Kerensky had managed to reconstitute the Starlink and keep it going, and they were able to continue with R&D and development. Inevitably, the better stuff like Omnimex and things, the Starlink would have come along most likely and designed things of that nature. But it never got there. If you go back prior to the Starlink, or the early stages of the Starlink, when the large laser was first concocted, when it was first, small lasers became medium lasers, became large lasers, however that progressed. So those lasers, we don't have any working examples of those. We don't have any stats for those early lasers. We do not know if they were bulkier or more or poor and worse in the heat department and damage department than 3025 versions of those. We just know that the 3025 is the standard go-to large laser, and that the Starlink era, which preceded it by by 100 years prior, before we seen by the end of the second succession war, the inability to continue manufacturing the Starlink era large ER large laser, is still superior in all ways to the original laser. And then, of course, the PPC, or the clans version of the ER laser is far superior to that one. So when the houses reintroduce that inner sphere variant of the ER large laser, it is not a very good design. It has a lot of problems, a lot of flaws, and most certainly does not in the same category field of capability that the clan variant uses. But there's a reason for that. The houses are trying to recapture something that they no longer have the ability or knowledge of how to produce. They can't produce Starlink era ER laser. Or if they can only produce it in limited numbers because it's being produced at a reconstituted or reactivated Starlink era ER laser factory. And there's something in that, something in the process, something in the design, something in the doohickeys and the widgets that is not it's not able to be duplicated across the inner sphere. So we see an inner sphere variant of an ER laser, and it's garbage, whereas in the opinion of many it is garbage. And this is potentially why that is. It's the same reason why potentially there's so many mediocre mech designs. You notice that prior to the arrival of the clans, there's only a very small handful of new mech designs that enter the field as the 3025, 3030. The number of development starts to increase with the Fourth Succession War, and the House is pouring lots of money and resources into beefing up their militaries, and of course the reactivation and the rediscovery of a bunch of older Starlink era equipment and blueprints. But true innovation is rare and few and far between. And so when you have such a massive destruction, a wanton, widespread, broad destruction of the infrastructure, the weapons facilities, the knowledge, and the weapons themselves, then trying to recapture that is going to be a painful process, and it's going to have issues. It's just like one of the biggest handicaps of many of the houses of the inner sphere are their piss poor education systems. Very few people get the level of education to come close to basic education under the Starlink banner. And this plays a role too, because how many intelligent, out-of-the-box thinking individuals exist in their untold billions in the inner sphere who never get to realize their full potential because they're held back by a crippled, archaic, broken education system of the various houses. It's only the handful, depending on which house you're in. All houses pretty much give you some basic education, but the more advanced education and the opportunities for larger, more advanced education grow more limited as you reach the top. And it has to do with your location and your wealth and your connections more than it has to do with situation. Anyway, so there we go. Where did all the warships go? What do they do with them? Where do they end up? And why aren't they piles of them now? Why aren't we just replacing all of the lost jump ships and stuff? In the years since the clan invasion, through the Dark Age, through the Jihad, into the Ilkhanate era, we see a further fracturing of the inner sphere. The once massive powerhouses of the Commonwealth and Federated Sons are decimated or having gross problems. The Fourier Worlds League it's blasted into its components that are now slowly reconstituting themselves. The clans have become something different. The clans have strayed from their original pedigree, from their original premise and concepts of what they were supposed to be under the Kerensky's son's view on how this stuff was supposed to work. They are so far from their original origins, it's not funny, and yet they still have this yet twisted corruption idea of what being clanners are. And in the process, some have improved, some have grown, many have regressed, a couple have been destroyed, one or two have now been reconstituted basically as puppets, and where the Ilkhan will take things is yet to be seen. I predict that things will not end well for Elric Ward and his Ilkhan House Wolf. And some of the things he pulled to help get him to power will come back to bite him in the ass. That's just my personal opinion. I think we will see a number of these former great houses reconstitute themselves, but they will never quite be the same. They're never going to be where they were before. It's just like the naval fleets. We will never see the sheer scale and level of warship capability and numbers that they had at any point prior to the First Succession War. There's just not enough will or resources to support that amount of stuff. B, it is what it is. This is really not a game about naval combat. It's a game about big stompy robots. It's like the current meme likes to go, and that's where we're going to stay. Warships have a niche, and they're cool and they're fun. When they're not, they are huge resource hounds and huge pulls on the various economies that build and support them. It's kind of interesting to know that you don't see a whole lot of evolution of new warship designs. Sure, when after the clan invasion and the houses start reintroducing their warship production lines, there is a couple of quote updated versions and or new, like the Fox Corvette. Well, it's a Corvette is a Corvette is a Corvette. It might have some unique specialty differences. Odds are it's because it's using a lot more dumbed down technology than earlier Starlink era Corvettes, but it still fits the niche. But there's no real outstanding new design. It's like mechs. We see a plethora of mech designs come. Lots of new mech designs start cropping up. From a game perspective, from the game company perspective, that's needed as a necessity. They need to bring in new stuff so they keep generating interest and keep generating sales. And if we don't buy their stuff, then they're not going to be in business. And they're in business to make money. Let's not kid ourselves. That is the whole point and whole partial of what the companies are doing, no matter how much we love and support it or want to rail on it as fans. So why did they, why is, if you look at a lot of the designs that keep coming out, for all intents and purposes, they're just clones of previous designs. There's only so many weapon combinations you can put together. So many weapons of it. Only so there's only so many 30-ton mech designs or 70-ton mech designs that can have X amount of weapons, and we only have X amount of weapons, regardless of the era or the manufacturing or the pedigree of those weapons. There's only so many combinations. You can only put so many of this, so many of that, and so many of those, and on that particular chassis. It's just like the technology goes into it, and there's design limits for a reason. We don't want to so radically alter the game mechanics. There's a reason we don't see such a extreme change in weapons. We have tried and true weapon systems that have been around since the beginning of the game system, and they work well. And we've seen some improvements, and we've seen some that weren't so improved. And then we have some, just like mechs, we see some good mechs, and we see some crappy designs. And then there'll be people, why did they ever make this design? Well, and we can justify it in story, or justify it by lore, or justify it just to justify it because we like how they look. But at the end of the day, it's always been a numbers game, and that's that. And like I said, I think I am going to do a video on mediocre mechs because there's a lot to be talked about in that aspect too. And that's just my opinion. So this is me, Rick, talking to you. It's a great Sunday out here today, and I hope you guys have a great weekend. Until next time.